Welcome to our program on Building Bridges Through Music, Beethoven in Beijing. This is our last program for 2020, and we are so pleased to have you with us for this one. We have 5 panelists and 2 guest speakers, including Nick Platt, who is President Emeritus of Asia Society. We have nearly 200 people registered for this event. We welcome our chair, board members, groundbreaker and innovator members, and friends from the global community. I'm Margaret Connolly, Executive Director of the Northern California Center, and our format today, we have a series of remarks from our guest speakers, starting with Rachel Cooper, Director of Global Cultural Diplomacy Initiatives at Asia Society, Ryan Fleur, Executive Director of the Philadelphia Orchestra, Jindong Cai, co-producer of the film, who will play a 5-minute beautiful clip of the film. Then we'll have a panel discussion with moderator Sheila Melvin, who is on our board. If you have a question during the program, go ahead and type it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Sheila will be monitoring those throughout the program. All of our speaker bios are on our website, and they can also be found in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. This event is on the record, and we are recording. We'll have just over an hour for this program. We'll end the public portion of this event at 6:15 Pacific. Then we'll have a VIP reception afterwards. Enjoy the program. And now to Rachel Cooper, our colleague joining us from New York. Rachel.
Thank you, Margaret. This is such a pleasure because I feel it's really in the DNA of the Asia Society to be doing culture as diplomacy and cultural diplomacy. It's the work of the institution over 60 plus years. And we're really honored to have Nick Platt here today. Ambassador Platt was our president for many years, and when I first came to the Asia Society, and he's been an inspiration because he really understood and was at the center of this kind of exchange that started in '73 with the Philadelphia Orchestra going to China. And it really opened up a whole new avenue of work and exchange between our two countries. In fact, it's not only about classical music of orchestral type, but it's also been much more enlarged with artists such as Wu Man or Wu Tong, who have worked using Chinese music and bringing it here. So the reciprocity of that kind of exchange has been so powerful. And it's all the more meaningful right now, I think, at a time where on other issues it's fraught, and yet here we have a moment where the exchange is about the joy of music and the channel that culture can really provide that is for the long term. And I think this is all about relationship building. So I'm really delighted to be part of this program and excited about what is coming up next. And I just want to now introduce Ryan Fleur, the Executive Director of the Philadelphia Orchestra, which is truly one of the world's great orchestras. They started this first exchange in '73, but it has continued in such vibrant and dynamic ways until the present moment. Ryan.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. And thank you also to the Asia Society, to Bard College and the U.S. China Music Institute for showcasing an important chapter in the Philadelphia Orchestra's history through the documentary Beethoven in Beijing. Since the orchestra's founding in 1900, making music outside of Philadelphia has been an important part of our legacy. And we've performed in all the world's major cities and capitals, for presidents and popes, and at world's fairs and expos. And through all of our travels, we brought our artistry and the imprimatur of the US around the world. And this began in earnest with Europe in 1949, the Soviet Union in 1958, and Japan in 1967. And that legacy, along with selling millions of commercial recordings and a good bit of politicking by the music director at the time, Eugene Ormandy, led to the orchestra's invitation in January 1973 to be the first American orchestra to travel to China. Though music can express what words cannot, it's democratizing. And that word, democratize, in its dual meaning, really captures the essence of the Philadelphia Orchestra's role that you see in Beethoven in Beijing. In its purest form, to democratize is to make something accessible to everyone. And that's the orchestra's vision, both then and today, to inspire joy and to connect humanity through what we call the Philadelphia sound. And it was in that spirit of democratization that the orchestra made music in 1973. We performed, and the entire Chinese nation heard Beethoven. Democratization also means to introduce a democratic system or democratic principles. And that's what the United States government, through President Nixon, Secretary Kissinger, all the way to Ambassador Platt, who at the time served as the on-the-ground liaison between the orchestra and the Chinese government, what they had in mind. And it was the intersection of these definitions of democratize that truly took place in 1973. Beethoven in Beijing captures a moment in time. It was the first chapter of an evolving story, and we're fortunate to have such a great documentary record. And the question that we reflect on now at the Philadelphia Orchestra is what does the next chapter look like, right? The orchestra used its 1973 visit as a launching point for return visits. And it really picked up with the Shanghai Expo in 2010. And at that time, we created a pilot, which then established long-term strategic partnerships with entities throughout China, concert halls, media companies, and municipal governments. And that work has flourished with our music director, Yannick Nézet-Séguin, up through the pandemic. The rate of change I have personally witnessed by traveling to China twice a year between 2012 and 2019 has been astounding, probably best embodied by the widespread extinction of both bicycles on the street and cranes in the sky as the modernization of China has progressed. In 2014, we were the first musical entity to live stream a concert from mainland China to the US. Today, that seems so quaint, right? The next chapter involves the intersection of the orchestra's vision with the needs of the people of China to learn music, to learn how to make music together better, and to demonstrate our artistry to inspire others. The next chapter also involves the orchestra learning from China, be it how to ensure 20 million people tune in to your classical music event, to how to operate in a cashless society. So over the years, the Asia Society has been a consistent presence with the Philadelphia Orchestra. From counsel provided out of the New York and Hong Kong offices, to joint events sharing our missions in the US and in China, to the work of Ambassador Platt, who to this very day remains a critical senior advisor to the Philadelphia Orchestra, nearly 50 years after this film begins. And we're grateful that Sam Katz, Jennifer Lin, and Sharon Mullally have told their version of this story. So thank you. So now I'd like to turn the program over to Jindong Cai. Jindong is a director of the US-China Music Institute at Bard College, where he also serves as artistic director of the China Now Music Festival. And probably most important and most relevant tonight, he's also a co-producer of Beethoven in Beijing. So thank you for the time, and over to you, Jindong.
Thank you, Ryan. Really, I'm so grateful for to be part of this incredible program. And throughout this week, the festival really gets so much attention, and I'm just very thankful for all the people, the organization involved, including the Philadelphia Orchestra and Asia Society and the film production team and everyone, and also the audience and from all over the world. And they have been participating in these festival events, and we are trying to show the inclusiveness of this Beethoven related with China. Basically want to show how Beethoven really deeply rooted in the Chinese society. And the film actually is an evidence of how classical music can connect to people. And we have, since we think maybe some people may not see the film yesterday, so we had 5 minutes, we have cut 5 minutes, a short cut, so for you to review a little bit about this film. So now this is the film.
Mr. Armandy? How are you, Mr. President? I'm just sitting here talking to Dr. Kissinger. He's just back from China. I know. And I thought you'd be interested to note that they're going to invite the Philadelphia Symphony to come to China. That's wonderful. You honor me, honor the orchestra. I'll let Dr. Kissinger tell you about the conversation. Here he is. Thank you very much, Mr. President. So Normandy.
Hello, Dr. Kissinger.
I was talking to the Chinese leaders about exchanges.
As soon as we got there, we had heard rumblings that Mrs. Mao had expressed disfavor at Beethoven's Fifth.
The Fifth is about the fate. Communists don't believe fate.
I said, Maestro, there's a strong request from the top to play Beethoven's Sixth, the Pastoral Symphony. And he looked at me and he said, well, you know I hate that symphony, and I didn't bring any scores. And at that point, I started to make things up. I said, Beethoven's Sixth is program music. It describes life in the countryside. And the Chinese communists came to power on the back of a peasant revolution.
Ormandy felt that the Sixth Symphony was not showing off the orchestra to his liking. That's the only reason he rebelled against it.
On the way to town, the musical head of the Friendship Committee sat with me and the translator. And the first question was, don't you like the Sixth Symphony of Beethoven? I said, oh yes, very much. Why didn't you program it? As we arrived in our hotel in Peking, he says to me, didn't you like the Pastoral Symphony? I said, yes, I told you that an hour ago. He says, but would you play it? I said, we can play it, but we don't have the music. Don't worry, we have it.
We did get scores from Shanghai and from Beijing. It was a big jumble of scores that came in.
The parts that we got didn't have our normal markings in them, bowings and things like that.
Everyone was individually handwritten, was full of mistakes. And we would be playing along and, oh, wrong note.
You're talking about the Philadelphia Orchestra. You're talking about Beethoven. It wouldn't have mattered if some pages were missing.
I was immediately seduced, actually, by this orchestra. But it's Beethoven.
After Cultural Revolution, we start to play Beethoven. We start to play Mozart.
In Shanghai, there are about 200,000 children studying the piano.
The interest is probably the greatest of almost anywhere in the world.
The Philadelphia Orchestra suffered from declining ticket sales and rising costs, and over the weekend, its board voted to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
We began to think what China might be as a second market.
They could practically help save classical music. And thank God for us, because we need the audience.
It was a dream come true moment when I played with the Great Philadelphia Orchestra.
In the concert hall in Europe or in America, it's Beethoven. It's holy. Beethoven wanted to shock and surprise.
This is the century to truly break the boundaries of what used to be untouchable.
If Beethoven would have known that one day his wonderful piece would be performed in China by an American orchestra, a Canadian conductor, and Chinese vocalists, Beethoven would just not have believed it.
That is so wonderful and inspiring. Great. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm going to first introduce the three speakers who haven't been introduced yet. And that's starting with Nicholas Platt, who's one of America's most distinguished Asia experts. He entered the Foreign Service in 1959, I believe, and served in many positions in countries over more than 3 decades, including as our ambassador to Zambia, the Philippines, and Pakistan. He began working on China early in his career. He accompanied President Nixon on the very historic 1972 visit to China that really signaled the resumption of our US-China relations. He was chief of the political section of the liaison office in Beijing in 73, 74, and in this capacity played a really crucial role in this Philadelphia Orchestra visit that we're talking about. And he's continued to play an important role, as Ryan mentioned. He also served as president of the Asia Society for a number of years and continues to be a really powerful and vocal advocate for the importance of cultural exchange. And when it comes to China, really importantly, I think the resilience and interdependence of our relationship, no matter how tough times get. He also wrote a great book called China Boys, How U.S. Relations with the PRC Began and Grew, which is a memoir of his experience, and it's really entertaining, engaging, and it's a very good read. Jennifer Lin spent more than 30 years as a journalist for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and a number of those were as its China correspondent in Beijing. In 2014, she left daily journalism behind to write her book, which is called Shanghai Faithful, Betrayal and Forgiveness in a Chinese Christian Family, which is a really beautiful book that delves into 150 years of her own family's history. And in so doing, it also tells the story of Christianity in China over the same period. And then I guess Jennifer decided that 150 years of family history wasn't daunting enough. So she followed that by creating a documentary, the project that brings us here, which is Beethoven in Beijing. And as you've seen, it tells the story of the Philadelphia Orchestra's path-breaking 1973 tour to China. But then it uses a prism through which to view the subsequent development of classical music in China and what happened in Philadelphia, and the really, truly mutually beneficial relationship that the Philadelphia Orchestra has built with its Chinese counterparts. Peng Peng Gong is coming to us from Shanghai. He is a composer and pianist who began studying piano when he was 5 and composing when he was 7. He enrolled at the Shanghai Conservatory Primary School when he was 8. Then he won the China National Youth Piano Competition. And when he was 9, he auditioned for Juilliard's pre-college program and moved to New York so he could study there. He graduated from Juilliard with a Bachelor's of Music in 2014. Peng Peng devoted much of his early life to becoming a pianist, but in his words, was really built to be a composer. And everything he did as a pianist was to fulfill that passion. I've seen several videos in which he explained that since his family sacrificed a great deal for him to become a world-class pianist, it took a lot of courage and resolve to forsake global concertizing and instead choose to focus on composing. But it's worked out very well because he's in his 7th season as resident composer for the Shanghai Philharmonic Orchestra. He is a very prolific composer of piano, chamber, and orchestral music, who was born, I think, in 1992, for the record, wrote his first symphony in 2008, and as of 2019 had completed 11 symphonies. His Symphony Number 10, Peking Fantasy, was co-commissioned by the Philadelphia Orchestra and the Shanghai Philharmonic. Peng Peng says he gets inspiration from domestic life, from people watching, and from breaking the boundaries between cultures. I think a really lovely example of this is his viola concerto, which is called Catcher in the Rye, and it's inspired by the novel of the same name that almost every American school child has read. And according to an interview I read, Peng Peng says he identified with Holden Caulfield as a teenager. And this video is up on YouTube, the concerto. It's really beautiful. I recommend it. So those are 3 speakers that you haven't met. And now I would just like to say thanks to the Asia Society in general and to the whole amazing team of the Asia Society Northern California in particular. We're here to talk about building bridges through music, Beethoven in Beijing. So our focus is on the bridge building for the future. But because today or yesterday is Beethoven's birthday, and he, through his life story and music, is really the consummate example of a bridge builder or of one who is used to build bridges, I thought I'd start with a quote from the great writer and translator Fule, who left Shanghai for Paris in the 1920s as a rather unhappy young man. And while he was there, he stumbled across a copy of Romain Rolland's Life of Beethoven. And this Romain Rolland won the Nobel Prize for Literature many years ago. He's not very well remembered right now, but he was very famous back then. And he opens his Life of Beethoven with a quote from Beethoven. The quote is, "I want to prove that whoever acts rightly and nobly can by that alone bear misfortune." And then this is followed by a plea from Rolland himself. He says that we, the denizens of a world weighed down by an undignified materialism, should gather around ourselves the heroic friends of the past, the great souls who suffered for the good of universal humanity. Because, he says, the lives of great men are not written for the proud or for the ambitious. They are rather dedicated to the unhappy, and who really is not unhappy? So Fule's response to this mirrored Rolland's own passion for Beethoven. Fule said, "I burst into tears and suddenly felt as if I had been enlightened by the divine light and gained the power of rebirth. From that time on, I wonderfully took heart, which was indeed a great event in my whole life." He went on to translate the Life of Beethoven into Chinese. During World War II, during the Japanese invasion, it became a really important book. His goal in translating it was to give people faith and hope in a time of darkness and to motivate them to fight like Beethoven did. Then he translated Jean Christophe, which is a 5-volume novel based on the life of Beethoven. It became incredibly popular in China, and Xi Jinping even cites it as one of his favorite books. So Beethoven became an early bridge for bringing classical music to China. And then the Philadelphia Orchestra became a later bridge for reviving this music in the period of the Cultural Revolution, and really for connecting the US and the PRC culturally over many, many years. So to begin with, I'd like to, as a launching pad, I'd like to look at this. The 1973 Philadelphia Orchestra visit really opened up a door, an entire new world, not just of cultural exchange, but of cultural creation. The cultural landscape in both the US and China were forever changed by it, and in my view, immeasurably enhanced. We're in a period now where cultural exchange is temporarily cut off pretty much because of the pandemic, but also where the US-China relationship is at a low point. And in fact, the US State Department recently canceled 5 official cultural exchange programs. So I thought we could use the story, the experience of the Philadelphia Orchestra and its relationship with China as a springboard and explore some of the lessons learned from the visit. It could be the hows or the whys of US-China cultural exchanges and how we can all continue to work to further these into the future, even in a fraught political landscape. So Ambassador Platt, if you could start with the sort of big picture, and then Jennifer, maybe you'd like to continue based on your experience making the documentary.
Thanks for having me. This is a subject that's dear to my heart. And it gives me a chance to tell people, you know, the US and China started their relationships at 2 different times in 2 different ways. The first was Nixon's visit, in which we were pretty much kept away from the Chinese people. The second was a year plus later when the 2 countries established offices in their own in their own capitals and enabled us to exchange delegations of all kinds. And it was an extremely exciting time in Beijing. I was there, and we had everything: basketball players, the orchestra, all kinds of bankers and airplane manufacturers and so on and so forth. But it was the beginning of the people-to-people relationship between the 2 countries. Now, when the orchestra was a big hit and became a sort of a household word, and the reason why it did was because they did things beyond just play music. I mean, I remember the first day that we were there, the orchestra members came out of the hotel and they started to throw frisbees around at each other. And that fascinated the Chinese public. You could get a crowd of 5,000 people in about 10 seconds in those days, and probably still. But in any case, they were very good at connecting with people. And lessons learned, I mean, it took a while. For a while, the orchestra would come and play for anniversaries and things like that. But then in 2010, we realized we had to set up a program that was sustainable. And sustainability obviously depended on what we could provide for them. And so we redesigned our programs. We used to come and play in a city and do a couple of concerts and then go away. But the lesson we learned was the best thing to do was to play and to stay. Mm-hmm. And that meant to use the orchestra's expertise to teach and to do other concerts with Chinese orchestras and so forth, go to conservatories, do pop-up concerts, things like that, which brought home to the Chinese that cultural exchange is a two-way street. And so we found ourselves doing a lot of new, different things. And we found that there was a wonderful audience for classical music in China, but what we found out was that the Chinese themselves
they wanted to bring their own orchestras up to speed, and they wanted to find out what it took in order to go on tour internationally. And that was their end of the two-way street. And so we worked to fulfill those hopes and provide that training. So that's the biggest lesson learned.
Terrific, terrific. Thank you. Jennifer, do you want to add on that? I mean, why did you decide, what were you looking for in this story, and why did you make it now?
Yeah, I've been researching this topic for a long time, Sheila, and what I found out was that Eugene Ormandy, when the U.S. table tennis team got invited to China, Eugene Ormandy was reading about it and watching it closely in Philadelphia, and he wanted to go to China. He was very anxious about performing in China, and he really lobbied the White House and finally got his way. And one of the reasons I wanted to make this movie is I really feel like this is kind of a forgotten chapter in American history. A lot of people know about ping pong diplomacy, that is what really opened up China and US relations, but music diplomacy is really just as important and arguably more lasting. So we start the film in 1973 and we explain kind of the context of the trip and how it helped to kind of open the door even further and create connections. But we end the movie in the present. And one of the things we want to show is kind of the evolution of the music world in China, but also the evolution of the relationship. So to pick up on the bridge analogy that is really the focus of this webinar, in 1973, this cultural bridge between the United States and China was really going in one direction, mainly from the US to China. But this bridge today is very much a two-way street. So we intentionally ended the film in Philadelphia in 2019 when the Philadelphia Orchestra performed a side-by-side concert in Philadelphia at the Kimmel Center, performing a piece by Peng Peng, his 10th symphony. So that was intentional. And in the movie, you'll hear Yannick Nézet-Séguin saying that it's very important for audiences here in the United States to understand what's happening in China and to hear the music from composers in China. So we very much want to capture the fact that this cultural bridge is now going in two directions. So that was some of the motivation behind the movie.
Great, thank you. And so Ryan, if you could jump in, this is perfect, because I think you joined the Philadelphia Orchestra in 2012, which is right when this two-way street started opening up. And I think it took the form of a multi-year residency in China. If you could talk a little bit more about that and about how it benefited the orchestra and its counterparts in China, and maybe even if there's other ways other orchestras or organizations can emulate it.
Sure. Well, actually, my first day on the job was actually in China at that pilot. It was, it's been fascinating, as I mentioned earlier, every time going back to China, watching how rapidly, not just the city, I was joking a little bit about bicycles and cranes, but watching how the organizations have developed, and even the number of orchestras that have developed in China since 2012. The last number I had heard was somewhere between 65 and 80. It might be more than 100 now in terms of orchestras that are in China. But the early experience was, in some ways it felt almost superficial. We would go to the Temple of Heaven, we would set up, and we would play music, and Nick, as you said, people would just gather. Right. And then over the years, it's evolved. It's evolved to us when we go to China now. It's always making music with musicians, whether they're musicians from the Shanghai Philharmonic or the National Center for the Performing Arts in Beijing. And what we've heard time and again from the major conservatories, as well as some of the aspiring conservatories, is we want how we can help the aspiring musicians of China, who are amazing. The technical ability, the competitive nature of technical ability is so astounding. But there are, Peng Peng is actually a rare gift in China, which is the artist who not only can perform and compose, but also when playing, listens to others and can make music that it can make music, as an ensemble. And that listening is something that we hear continually. Our counterparts in China, are craving, and it evolves. It was easy in 2012. It was easy to, you would always get requests. Oh, come to this neighborhood or this city because a new concert hall was getting built, right? But now the concert halls are built, and now it's really about fielding the depth. And there are, yes, we go. We go at least once a year. We bring the full orchestra either once every year or every 2 years, but anytime, right now we're exploring what we might do in fall of 2021. And, the answers we get are, there are 3 other orchestras that are also coming in the fall, from either the United States or Europe. And so it's we know that the demand is there, and it's very tangible.
Wonderful. Great. So Peng Peng and Jindong, you are both sort of travelers on this two-way street. I wonder if you wanted to address the questions. Or is there anything you'd like to say?
For me, it's a really life experience. From the very beginning, when Nixon visited China, and it's a part of this whole history, when the Philadelphia Orchestra visited China in 1973, and then after the Cultural Revolution, when we hear the Beethoven Fifth Symphony in 1977 again, and then after that, there's with the Philadelphia Orchestra's first visit, then in the 1970s, there's so many orchestras visited, like the Karajan bring the Berlin Philharmonic, and C.J. Ozawa bring the Boston Symphony. And that, I just remember every single concert I went, every rehearsal I went. We didn't have those fancy concert halls. Like Karajan basically play in the Coliseum, and Ozawa and also play in the stadium. So, but the thing to me, I feel like when I look at this Karajan conducting and hear this orchestra came out, the Beethoven Seventh, that sounds I've never ever heard before, that way of the powerful way. And I see C.J. Ozawa conduct with his body moving, and also the sound come from orchestra. It's just unbelievable. This kind of emotional to me, and that made me decide I want to be a Western music musician. I want to be a conductor, and if I want to study conducting, then I have to go to America. So then I went to New England Conservatory. I studied with Bernstein in Tanglewood, and then I start to did my career in conducting. And now, I feel like China is open. There are more concert halls. There are more possibilities. I want to get this kind of inspiration I get from the masters to the next generation, and to either to introduce American music to the Chinese audience, or bring more Chinese music to the West.
Okay, great. Peng Peng, you're the next generation.
Well, yes. Well, I mean, being a slightly younger guy, I mean, the downside of that is that I would have forever missed watching Karajan live, because I was born in '92. But the upside is that, the last decade of the past century was the peak, where, it was about 20 years after China's reformation and opening up to the world, and every single kind of Western and foreign culture has been pouring in, and it's been influencing every part of our lives, starting from kindergarten. I mean, I grew up, with recordings of Chopin, Beethoven, Brahms, and Wagner, and and I had the great opportunity to audition for Juilliard's pre-college when I was 9, but it was the year after the September 11 terrorist attacks. So visas were almost impossible to get. And I was rejected 4 times in a row. And the 5th time was rebooked by a surprise help from the school, who contacted Yo-Yo Ma and Hillary Clinton, who was then Senator of New York, and to send 2 letters on behalf of the school to persuade the consulate to change their mind. He said, we have this kid who is willing, who has a potential and who just wants to study, and so I got my way. and I was offered the best education, the best atmosphere, even the best top agencies, and to start a potential career as a pianist. But being in that wild, crazy, free world called New York City, I mean, it also gives you this kind of creative urge, which is a result both from inspiration from the repertoire and teenage rebel and so on. And so I've decided, so I've made a major shift into composition, which was a very hard decision for the family, because I mean, everyone was expecting this new Long Long. I mean, I even dropped my my surname for a while just to call myself Peng. But just like like the Beethoven quotes, I mean, you can't really resist if you really want to leave a legacy that's beyond just performance. I mean, it's a new kind of training. It's a new kind of spiritual training. So I graduated from Juilliard's college as a composition student in 2014, and I came back to take the post of the resident composer with the Shanghai Philharmonic, who is almost the only orchestra nowadays who offers a full job for a living composer, and presents an annual portrait program, which is something you cannot dream of before. And the result of that is our recent partnership with Philly, and I got my dream come true to have the two orchestras play the 10th Symphony in Philly back in 2019, which is only a year ago. And so, I mean, this is the real time, and this tragic surprise of this pandemic. It really reminds us of how important it is to throw aside everything besides just pure humanity. And I think countries like China and US are really among the most important relationships in world politics. I mean, one wrong move from either country is going to result in chaos for the world. So we are lucky to be musicians who speak that international language, and we will continue to speak it, to write it, to play it, and as long as we breathe. So and I'm just grateful to be here to see everyone again. I mean, it feels like I'm back in the West again. It feels like
fantastic. And that's a good, that leads me to a next question, which anyone can answer this. Is there something particular to music, and especially to classical music, as a means for cultural communication and for cultural exchange? Ambassador Platt, I had mentioned last time, you said a quote that music actually purifies the soul, which apparently Xi Jinping actually said, and you were quoting him. And also the CEO of the Philadelphia Orchestra, Matthias Tarnopolsky, mentioned, he said, whatever the political backdrop, music prevails. So I wonder if one of you would like to address this issue. Is there something special about classical music as a vehicle for exchange and communication between our two nations?
Well, let me start.
Okay.
Everybody has ideas on this. But the Chinese really had an infrastructure for picking up developing talent, even though it was not politically necessarily very correct. But the important thing was that a lot of younger people knew how to play the piano, knew how to play the violin, so on and so forth. And this has created a marvelous audience for all classical music. Now, my private view is that the Chinese really lack, or let's put it this way, they yearn for abstract in their art, because most of their art and music, so forth, is very descriptive. It's descriptive of, it's program music, really. And so here comes Beethoven and Rachmaninoff and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of abstraction there. The Chinese also like things that are big and grand. And God knows Beethoven is big and grand. And a big orchestra like the Philadelphia Orchestra is grand, and the music that it makes is wonderfully grand. So it's going to be a language no matter who speaks it, for all time to come.
Okay, wonderful. Agreed. Does anyone else want to add to that? Peng
As
Peng?
well said.
Yeah,
Ryan? Yeah, okay.
You know,
I think like Ryan said, you know, China, the orchestra, and in the past 20 years, they're building concert halls, opera houses. Now, in the past 10 years, I would say they're building orchestra because they need content in those places. And it's every major city now you have orchestra, and a secondary city and third degree city, they already start to have the orchestra. I think this orchestral movement will continue to develop in China. And with the orchestra there, then composer are going to write it. So I think, you know, in the 21st century, doesn't matter in the West and the East, we're all looking for the future of the classical music. Where we go, right? We have been playing dead people music for so many years. Beethoven 250 years old. And we also, those are high days of symphonic literature, high days of symphonic music. We need them. But at the same time, we need the music of our time. Sure. I think this what is important, and China and America can work together to create something new.
It's great.
And that's beginning to happen. The latest trend in classical music in China is really the orchestration of modern Chinese composers and the fitting in of traditional Chinese instruments into an orchestral setting, which is very difficult to do, given the fact that these are all very quiet instruments. But if you go to a conference, you'll find that most of what's played is new Chinese composers like Peng Peng, and people are really interested in figuring out how to orchestrate this music so that it's attractive. Is that wrong, Peng Peng, or is that right?
And I'm so glad that Jindong and Nick mentioned this, because, you know, to be completely honest, you know, I actually see new music as maybe the real, you know, final contribution that I think the Chinese can offer to the world. Because if we look at history of classical music, you know, it's always the repertoire. I mean, of course, in the 20th century, virtuoso and, you know, and the art of conducting performance has risen to an, you know, unimagined degree of high level. But I think, you know, just culturally, I think, you know, there is no way that you can ask any Eastern orchestra to play Beethoven the way Berlin Phil does, or to play Strauss the way Vienna does. But, you know, but it's also hard because, you know, new music, sometimes it also draws away audiences because of the way the music sounds. But we're all searching, you know, modern composers are really searching back into the root of what made music international. And I mean, we've went through, you know, intellectual hardship because we used to only imitate, you know, Europe from the 60s almost entirely. And the new music that sounded, you know, it became actually, you know, unlikely to reach a wide audience. But I think, you know, after every kind of search and test, the modern composer, it really comes back to the root of how we want to express our humanity, and how do we really make an audience who's not necessarily musically trained, but responds and be reminded of their own humanity. I mean, I would like to share one scene that I remember so well from our joint concert with Philly. I mean, it was in January of last year, and it was, you know, the two countries are not at the height of their friendship. So we had these two flags. Our two flags were kind of hiding in the back at Kino Center, but for me, when I was sitting in the audience, I felt like, you know, this is the time. You know, this music only exists in time. And 90 minutes of international repertoire. I mean, this is not anything that politics or things other than music itself can speak. So I'm just really grateful. And
that's lovely. Thank you. Ryan, you know, Peng Peng, you brought up the pandemic, and we're all here on Zoom because of it. And I wanted to see if we could look ahead a little to musical and cultural exchange in the post-pandemic world. I mean, the Philadelphia Orchestra first visit to China was in a time of relative darkness for many people in China, particularly intellectuals, musicians, and it provided a really welcome moment of hope. And then afterwards, when China reopened to the world, countless musicians flooded in, and the American schools and conservatories opened their doors to musicians from China. And now it's the US who's suffering, you know, from this pandemic, very unequally compared to what's happened in China. So I wonder, Ryan, if we could start with you, do you see any kind of a role for ways that I know orchestras are suffering terribly, and operas and ballets and all kinds of performing arts. Are there ways China can help us, Chinese organizations or counterparts can help us as we try to rebuild after the pandemic?
Well, you know, what we had to learn at the Philadelphia Orchestra, you know, last March when we, you know, the last concert we gave, at the last minute, we weren't allowed to have an audience, you know, a live audience. So we streamed the concert, but at that night we became, rather than a live performing arts organization, we became a broadcast media company, and it's been a lot of learning from that. But we were scheduled. We were going to be bringing, we were going to be bringing a delegation to Shanghai, you know, in May, and you know, we thought certainly, you know, things will be better by then, and then that couldn't happen, but. You know, what we did is we experimented, and so what we started doing is we started giving master classes. So we did master classes with students from the Shanghai Conservatory. We did master classes with students from the China Music Conservatory through Zoom. And what we're learning now for us, the next phase is we've moved. Originally, our partnerships were always all very government centric, U.S. government. You know, municipal government. Now it's moved to a lot of our partnerships. Yes, we work with the State Department, but they're with, you know, they're with orchestras, and they're with, you know, with other media companies in China, and that's worked well. But now what we're learning is we're learning how to connect directly with the people of China, and that's, you know, so we're learning how to use WeChat as a vehicle, right, to communicate and frankly and to transact business, which in you know, at the end, we're very hopeful that with the new administration coming in, some of the silly WeChat restrictions will loosen up. But we are, you know, we've built a whole technology system that to be able to transact and, you know, to make our events available, to sell things directly to the Chinese people. But what we've done that by actually bringing on board members, Chinese citizens who are now board members of the Philadelphia Orchestra. And one of those things that they've brought is the expertise around how to build those things. So yes, we're absolutely, you know, we're learning that. I think we believe China is actually farther ahead than the U.S. in that realm of, you know, of the world. And you know, that's the you know, the most important. The other thing that I think we're learning is watching just the extreme organization and the level how that helps in times like this. You know, we're putting together a Lunar New Year concert, for example, that we'll be doing in February, and one of the pieces we were performing is the Butterfly Lovers Concerto. And okay, well, it's pandemic times. Nobody could send us the music. Everything was shut down. So what did we do? We went to Shanghai. We went to our friends in the Shanghai Philharmonic. We were able to get the music, and you know, and that's, so it's that type of benefit. And I know, you know, I just know coming into the next generation, you can't help if music and culture is such a deep part of the upbringing of every Chinese citizen growing up, which is something that's been absent in the US and Canada, and now increasingly in Europe. I think we're going to see over the next 20, 30 years, we'll be learning more and more from you know, and that's where the cutting edge of music will be. So.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? If not, we can go to audience questions. Jennifer, I think this one's for you. It's from Tom Gold. And he said it was a terrific film, which I guess he watched yesterday. And he mentioned seeing Madame Mao or Jiang Qing in the front row when the Philadelphia Orchestra was there, and recalled that afterwards there was that campaign against absolute music, which criticized Lin Biao and Confucius, and also indirectly Beethoven. And he wonders why that's not in the film. So I guess the bigger question is, how do you decide what to put in and what not to put in? Because there's lots of things, and I'm sure people are going to say, hey, why wasn't that in? But you had an hour and a half. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Right. So Tom, there were a lot of thousands of decisions that you have to make when you're putting together a film. And the question became, how deeply do we want to get into just the situation in China in 1973 versus taking the story forward? And in the end, we opted to present what was happening in 73, but then to carry it forward, using the death of Mao as the real turning point when this pent-up demand for learning and performing classical music was really released. So yes, I know what you speak of because of what I read in Sheila and Jindong's book, Rhapsody in Red, which describes it. And actually, Sheila, this is interesting because you and Nick Platt have differing points of view of what was happening behind the scenes, because after the Philadelphia Orchestra was in China, they left in September 1973, there was this crackdown on Western classical music. And, it appeared in the, in the official newspapers, the People's Daily, suddenly Beethoven was now, down with Beethoven. And so it's good to have the two of you here, Jindong and Sheila and Nick, because the crackdown on classical music, who do you think was behind it? Because there's one camp that says Madame Mao was behind it, and then there's another one that says Zhou Enlai was behind it. So I had the two.
I'm in the Zhou Enlai camp because Madame Mao was totally identified with Beethoven and all of that, and this was just Zhou Enlai getting back at her. And you were absolutely right not to put it in the movie because it was really a sideshow, and it was domestic politics rearing its ugly head once again.
I would think differently, because that's it's an internal political struggle between Jiang Qing, the gun of four, and Zhou Enlai's camp. And Jiang Qing is using this tactic to say, and Zhou Enlai want to go back. So that's how the classical music, they started bashing the classical absolute music. It said, this absolute music, actually it's not really absolute music. They're definitely composer living in their society. They have to have the very, very heavy mark and with the society. And same time, it said, and to invite the foreign orchestra, it's really surrender to the capitalist. So that's during that time, that's what was debating. And I think, so later on, I think it really, and either of them didn't win. I think this thing just started a new movement and then go to the next chapter.
But back to Tom's question, Sheila, in the end, we didn't put that into the film. And what we discovered in crafting the story is that unfortunately, in the United States, there were a lot of people who really didn't even understand what the Cultural Revolution was, like younger colleagues who were working with us on the film. It's not something that's necessarily deeply taught in American schools. So, to get into the weeds of the crackdown on Beethoven would have required us to go into the weeds of Chinese politics at the time. And it just seemed too deep for what we were trying to convey, which is, there was this period of repression, Mao died, and then things really took off and went from 0 to 100 miles per hour, basically in one generation. So, as a filmmaker, you have to make these constant decisions as to how deeply you want to go into the topic.
Right. Jennifer, just quickly, Pierre Schwab wants to know if people who didn't see the viewing of the documentary yesterday, how can they see it again?
Well, it is going to be on PBS Great Performances in the spring. So you can check our social media presence for when that's actually going to be, but that's going to be the next big broadcast of the film.
Okay, great. Okay, and this question maybe, I don't know, Peng Peng Jindong, Ryan, it's David Zay is asking, saying that classical music is financially strapped in the United States, and what is the situation in China? Is it better there? Peng Peng, you studied in China and went back to China to work as a composer. Maybe you want to address that first.
Well, I mean, at least in big cities like Shanghai and Beijing, I mean, it's still almost normal because because we did the hard way to really tame it, to try to tame it by restricting everybody anywhere. So
sorry, what about the financial support? He's saying that with the Philadelphia Orchestra had a bankruptcy problem. How is the financial support for classical music in China compared to in the United States?
Well, the orchestra in China, I would say, orchestra in China, most of them are owned by the government. And the cultural bureau or city cultural sector or something. So they always owned by the government. So the government give them salary. And I think that has some extent this kind of a continuation that's influence. Of course, those days, the city government or the provincial government want to have orchestra there. It's really, I think mostly it's for a cultural reason. They want this city to be like a cosmopolitan, and the orchestra is very important. So they support the orchestra, and they also not only support the orchestra, but also they support commissioning pieces. And in the past, maybe 20 years before or earlier, when they commission a piece, they always have something attached to it, maybe a political message or not. But those days, I think they mostly commissioning you to write piece more about China and about I don't think necessarily going to have always have a political message in it, right? The Peng Peng, you can say more about that.
Well, I mean, we're kind of blend and blur the boundaries because and really not just trying to write music that sounds good by itself. I mean, because I think for us, I mean, we really can't think too much about whether this piece is for this occasion or is it for yourself, because everything is is between the writer and the listener. So I mean, and the one good side about being state-owned is that you get the minimum wage. I mean, I still got a three-digit salary in USD in February, which is better than nothing.
But do you take commissions? And
yes. Well, I mean, my contract with the Shanghai Phil so far is one full program of new music a year, whether it's for myself or it could be co-government commissioned. It could be like the 70th anniversary of the PRC, but it's just very vague theme that no, I mean, it's not like a film where you have to, inspect. I mean, there's going to be certain inspections, but it's really freeing up because they realize that they would need to if you want to have a place in the world, everybody is watching you, everybody is listening to you.
Yeah, I think for me, I conduct the Chinese orchestras often, so I see the financially support to the orchestra, depending on the city, depending on where the city is richer, then they will have more money to put into the orchestra. For example, Suzhou Symphony Orchestra is only 2.5-year old orchestra, but Suzhou, as you know, is a very prosperous. They have lots of money, and then they build this orchestra. Then when you conduct it, they say, look, this orchestra, 60% of the players are foreigners. all the probably most of the woodwind and brass players come from Europe and from America, and the string players, many of them come from Korea, from Taiwan, and plus Chinese on overseas students come back to play. I think financially in those kind of major cities or those rich cities, they're in much better shape. But the same, by the same token, if you go to the rural area and they still want to have an orchestra, but they do struggle with the financial support from the government.
Okay. Ryan, we got it. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to add, I want to correct just the first actually part of the sentence about U.S. orchestras being financially strapped. I mean, obviously in this pandemic, nobody has any sort of ticket income. So that's, we've all had to adapt in those circumstances. But in general, an orchestra that is creative, has a strong mission, puts together creative programming, finds unique partnerships, and is out there and present in the community in which it exists and in other communities is not financially strapped. And that's true across the United States. Now, it's not always easy to find the mix of organizations that do those things. And if you don't do all of them, then you will get into trouble because, just like in China, there's, tends to be one major subsidy source, which tends to be the municipal governments. In the US, the business model is primarily philanthropy. And it comes from contributions. But I will say, when we travel to China and we perform in a city, their top ticket price is $400. I mean, the cities, those places, the government is not subsidizing our performance fees. It is coming from people buying tickets, and they're paying, which does not happen in the United States. It's a much higher ticket price in China.
And the audiences are much younger.
Much, much younger.
Yeah.
Sarah Williams-Ryan wants to know if the Great Firewall of China has any impact on the development of the sort of online non-governmental interaction and musical collaboration with technology that you're using during the pandemic. Does it have any impact on it?
So what we know is, first off, it's sort of the quiet secret. If you're in China and you can't, I remember the first time I went to China and I got to the hotel and they gave me the list of all the things I couldn't do Bloomberg and I couldn't do the New York Times and I couldn't do Facebook. And then I learned about getting a VPN when I was there. And so there are ways to experience everything. What we have learned is that a lot of US based servers are very slow in China. Just the connection of getting even through VPN. So it is, if you're a Chinese citizen and tonight we're doing a holiday program, you wanted to purchase that and experience it, you can, but it is very slow. So actually the way we're going about it is we're in the process of building servers that are based in China, and so it's actually going to mimic our website. So we'll have a Chinese website that, the only difference it'll be in both English and in Chinese, but that because the servers will be there, it'll exceed that. And again, because it's music, we've yet to experience anybody censoring what we're doing or hearing about things censoring what we're doing in that sense.
Yeah, we have the same thing actually. This time during the festival, we requested from Shanghai Symphony to have some music concert pieces but we really very slow to download them here even. From there to here, it takes days to get them, but eventually you can get them. So I think there's this between two sides. It can be better, right? I think it should be better in the future.
Yeah.
Ryan, that's really interesting. That's a very interesting workaround. And I wonder that tells me that you really see your audience. You have an audience in America and you have an audience in China. I mean, are they of equal size or equal importance, or how do you look at your audience? And has it changed because of the pandemic?
Well, first of all, our even in the pandemic, what we're seeing is the audience weekly. We're seeing people from almost every state in the United States and 25 countries, regularly consuming, our content. In China, though, it's very special, and Nick talks about it a little bit in the film. One of the oddest experiences was being told before I got there that everybody's going to know the Philadelphia Orchestra. Really, everybody will know. But to go to meeting after meeting, it was first, there wasn't a government official you wouldn't meet who didn't tell you where they were when we played in 1973. And now what happens is I hear where people's parents or grandparents were when they played. And the rich culture of so many children studying classical violin and classical piano, combined with it's one of those things. It's if you can, it's very hyper competitive to get into a university in China, let alone a university in the United States, and so we actually have something of value that and so we do see audiences, and a lot of our audiences up to this point again have been driven either through government partnerships or through other partnerships. We're at this point now where we're really working on the people-to-people aspect without the assist of the governmental entities.
Great. Jennifer, is Beethoven in Beijing going to be shown in China?
Well, that's a very good question. It may be problematic because of some of the content, the Cultural Revolution and the Madame Mao storyline. So we haven't approached any distributors in China, but it could be an issue.
Okay, so unclear. Okay, good. All right. So we have time, I think, for one more question, and that is where we talked a lot about the two-way street, which I think we've talked about mostly in terms of Western music. We've referenced Chinese music a little bit. So I wonder when we can see a true two-way street with Chinese music, instruments, arts more generally, really becoming integrated into the United States, into the education system, into our humanity. Peng Peng, you keep referring to humanity, but the way it's worked right now, the classical music has gone into China's humanity, but music and arts from China haven't come as much into our humanity. I wonder if we think we're going to see that in the next 50 years.
I personally, I see it in the repertoire. Maybe Jindong one day can commission a piece from me.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I think still everything is. I mean, my first lesson at Juilliard, in theory class, the teacher sat us down and says, "We are here because of the repertoire. Nothing else but repertoire." So, and as a pianist turned composer, I'm secretly very ambitious, but there are realities, realities they have to know. There's so much great talents nowadays. You're standing on the shoulders of the great masters, and to really break that boundary, and I think we are closer to any other century. And I think Jindong might agree with me. So.
I think, and when you go to conservatories in China, you see this talented violin player or piano player, but also you see those talented pipa player and erhu player, right? You can see those, and they can, many of them can make great career in China. But in the West, we really know about those instruments and really know about the Chinese music. And so that's what, one thing I have been trying to do is to bring some more Chinese music or bring more Chinese instrument into the West. And one of our mission for the US-China Music Institute at Bard College is to embrace that. We start to have this Chinese instrument major in the Western Conservatory. So you can learn to play guzheng, play pipa, and in Bard Conservatory, and the same that you study from Chinese professors actually. So this the online education actually even open more possibilities for us. So, and I think it takes time. If you think about orchestra development, and when Haydn started orchestra, there's only the most you have a couple of oboes or a couple of French horns. And then Mozart, went to France, found out that the clarinet actually already implied in the orchestra. So then he went back to, he added clarinet in his last few symphonies. And then, Beethoven started to use trombones in the orchestra. So the orchestra developed until from then to now, it's a process. And in the early 20th century, Stravinsky added so bunch of different kind of percussion instruments into it. And today, and you can easily to see it, this one can expand. I think definitely it's a possibility.
Okay.
It's going to happen. It's already beginning to happen. Not too long ago, maybe even 15 years ago, nobody except the Chinese American community would celebrate the Lunar New Year, or the Asian American community. Now it's very prominent. And there are a number of musical programs that are built around it. And in each one of those concerts and so forth, there's always some representation of Chinese traditional music and Chinese modern orchestral music. It's not widespread, but it's getting there.
Listen, it's going to happen, and it's inevitable. And in the United States, actually, since the trigger of the George Floyd incident, and that's what's happened is you see it already. The programming of orchestras, even though they're just virtual, has completely changed. Yes, there's Beethoven. Yes, there's the core, but all of a sudden there's this diversity of female composers, Black composers, et cetera, that's happening. And listen, and to get to the point that you were making earlier, Peng Peng, great music is great music. And if in China you're training more composers, there's there's more music being written. It is inevitable. People will want to hear great music. It will be something to look for in the years ahead.
I'm looking forward to commissioning Peng Peng to write orchestral work for us for the next China Now Music Festival probably. Okay. It's great composer. I love your music, and I think that's the hope. We have new generation composers. They are not only stand with this core classical music repertoire, but also they are open-minded to all the different kind of possibilities. And so I think that I really have a great hope on the classical music in the future.
Yeah, Peng Peng is the new generation. The middle generation is people like Tan Dun. And Tan Dun wrote a lot of music that Americans really loved around movies and other things. And his new music is also widely admired.
Fantastic. Great. This has been a really, really interesting talk. I thank you all for it. And I wish it could go on longer, but it can't. And we wish Beethoven a happy birthday, and thank you all for your work. And I have to turn it back to Margaret now.
Sheila, thank you very much. And thank you to all our speakers and filmmakers. This was a beautiful way to end our year of programming. Thank you. Next time, we're going to need to add performances with Peng Peng and Jindong. Keep an eye out for the film Beethoven in Beijing, which will air on PBS on April 16th. Asia Society is hosting virtual programs around the world. You can get that listing of events at asiasociety.org/online. We're a nonprofit. We're approaching year end. Our mission of building bridges between the US and Asia is more important than ever. If you feel the urge to make a donation to support our work or any of the organizations of our speakers that you heard here just now, please contact us. One program you're not going to want to miss at Asia Society is our third annual virtual Future of US-China Conference on January 14th. We'll honor George Shultz, our honorary chair, who turned 100 years young last weekend. Henry Kissinger will also join us, and you can sign up on our website. For all the film fans in our audience today, we'll be returning to Sundance in 2021. Their festival will be virtual. The event that we're going to host will be on January 29th, and you can check our website for details. You can follow everything we're doing on Instagram and Twitter using the handle @AsiaSociety, @AsiaSocietySF. And for those joining our VIP reception, please click over to the second link that was emailed to you right before this program. We're going to join Nick Platt for a beer. And thank you again to our speakers and Rachel Cooper in New York. Thank you to our team, Jamie, Pilar, Rexel, Michael, and our interns. And from all of us at the Northern California Center, stay safe.